The opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Eastlink Community TV, its sponsors, or partners.
Welcome to the 2024 Symons Medal presentation and lecture on the state of Canadian Confederation, proudly presented annually at Confederation Centre of the Arts. Awarded to Canadians who have made outstanding contributions to our country, previous recipients include the Honourable Jean Charest, Mary Simon, the Honourable Anthony Maillet, the Honourable Murray Sinclair, Sheila Rogers, and the Honourable Michael Ignatieff. A total of 23 recipients have been granted the award, hailing from coast to coast to coast. The Symons ceremony is held in the birthplace of Confederation to mark the anniversary of the Charlottetown Conference of 1864. Since long before that historic meeting, Prince Edward Island has been known as Epequet to the Mi'kmaq people, who have lived here for more than 10,000 years. We proudly move forward together in the spirit of reconciliation and to continue the ongoing conversation of an evolving Canada. Since 2004, the Symons Lecture Series has provided a national platform for diverse and distinguished Canadians to share their thoughts on the current state of Confederation, giving all Canadians the opportunity to reflect upon our country and its future. Named in honor of the late Professor Thomas Symons, a visionary and founding president of Trent University, Professor Symons was widely recognized for his contributions in the areas of public policy, heritage, and education. To commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Symons Medal and mark 160 years since the 1864 Charlottetown Conference, a historic 4 medalists will be honored this year. Christy Clark, 35th Premier of British Columbia. The Honourable Dr. Philippe Couillon, 31st Premier of Quebec. Joseph Handley, 10th Premier of the Northwest Territories. The Honourable Frank McKenna, 27th Premier of New Brunswick and 20th Canadian Ambassador to the United States of America. Their time as premiers covers 4 decades of Canadian politics, spans East, West, North, and Quebec regions of the country, and provides a wealth of experiences from across the political spectrum. This will make for a riveting and inspiring event.
Nous aurons maintenant la chance d'assister à un dialogue entre les 3 lauréats de la médaille Symons qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui. Le panel sera animé par la journaliste chevronnée et correspondante politique principale de CBC, Rosemary Barton.
Rosemary Barton. Rosemary Barton is the first woman to hold a position of CBC's chief political correspondent and guides viewers with daily political coverage on CBC News. She hosts the Nationals at Issue and delivers a weekly dose of political news affecting Canadians on Sunday mornings as the host of Rosemary Barton Live. In 2016, she received the Canadian Screen Award for Best Host of a News and Information Program for CBC News Network's Power and Politics. Please welcome the 2024 Symons medalist back to the stage with Rosemary Barton.
Hi. This is the less formal part of the event. I'm hoping we'll have a conversation and some laughs and try and get some answers from our guests. Thank you all for having me, Steve and the center. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for getting me the heck out of Ottawa for 24 hours. I made a little list of everything, this is like as much as I could remember, that I've been covering since September, after I came back from my summer hiatus. Bear with me. The end of the supply and confidence agreement between the Liberals and the NDP, multiple confidence votes that the government survive, the passing of pharmacare, the House of Commons grinding to a halt and no business being done. Now they're on a break week. 3 elections in provinces, including in Christy Clark's on Saturday. The beginning of a revolt against the Prime Minister of Canada by his own caucus. One of your own MPs might be involved. Watch Power and Politics later for that. And as I was flying here, on a more serious note, the government expelled 6 Indian diplomats, and the Prime Minister told the country that India had supported a campaign of violence against Canadian citizens. So my bosses were wondering why they had approved me going here and when the heck I'm coming back. But I am delighted to be here. I'll be back tomorrow morning. The Prime Minister's in front of the Foreign Interference Inquiry, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, and I was glad that Frank McKenna said all that about change, because it is very difficult, I think, for all of us to navigate the world right now. I didn't even mention, of course, the 2 wars that are ongoing. It's very difficult to be a journalist. I noticed that almost everyone mentioned how wonderful watching television is these days. Thank you all for that. And it's very difficult to sort of stay on top of things that affect you and your families. So it's actually nice to have a moment to sit here and just think about the state of the country and talk about the country rather than be caught up in the whirlwind that is my job. So I'm glad to have the chance to discuss it all with you all who have done so many remarkable things in your lives. I'm going to start with a super easy question. Christy Clark's already shaking, but I'm not. I love former politicians, current ones not as much. I'll start with.
Us too.
Yeah, I bet. I'm going to start with you, Frank McKenna. I just want your sense of sort of the state of democracy in this country. We don't have to get into foreign interference and everything that's happening, but just whether you feel like people are engaged and how politicians are helping or hurting our ability to be part of shaping this country.
Well, it's a big question and an important question. I think we tend to be cynical. I find now that I'm not elected, I'm quite cynical about the state of politics. But I actually think that in Canada, we produce very good political leaders. None of us were perfect or are perfect, but the people that I've served with and the people that I observe are sincere people trying to do their best for the country. Yeah. They're not dishonest people, they're not vicious, and they do respect democracy. And if the government changes in BC or Saskatchewan or New Brunswick, people will walk out the door and other people will walk in the door. So I think in that sense our democracy is safe. I want to say one final thing though on this, in terms of maybe a proof point to that. The last time that you and I met, and the last time I think that you and I were together, Christy, was at Brian Mulroney's funeral. And Brian Mulroney led this country through some very controversial issues, whether it be the GST or whether it be free trade. Even building the bridge here in Prince Edward Island was controversial and so on. But at the end of it, I felt that he would have been extraordinarily proud with the way that he was lauded and respected at his funeral. People looked at his record of accomplishment and concluded that he had been a wonderful leader for our country. Yeah. And all of us from all political persuasions were there to honor him for that. And that
you didn't always get along with him, we should say.
Pardon me?
You didn't always get along with him.
No,
no,
not always. I actually got along with him quite well because
you didn't agree with him.
He gave me a lot of money for my highways and for a lot of things. But no, we didn't agree on everything. But I think all I'm trying to say out of that is that at the end of the day, I think Canadians do respect the sincerity of the people who have served us.
Yeah. How about you, Joe Hanley? Do you think that people are engaged in democracy enough right now in this country?
I think they are. In the Northwest Territories, we operate on a non-party system, consensus system, so it's a little bit different and probably a little bit more positive than the party politics that we.
Oh, they like that here.
Yeah. But I think people are engaged, and they certainly have. We've had a fairly long history of putting a lot of trust and faith in our one single member of parliament and our one single senator. So we're doing okay.
Christy Clark, how about you?
I think both of those things are true. I think that we have produced a lot of really great politicians in this country, and it's not an easy country to govern by any stretch of the imagination, and so are most of the provinces tough to govern. And I think it's also true that people are very engaged in democracy. I do think, though, we need to pay attention to the divisiveness in the country now, and the sense that there are some people who are so intensely partisan about politics now that there's not enough talking going on between them. And the thing that makes great politicians work, or good politicians work, is that we can talk to each other and you can come to agreements and you can find a concurrence amongst you. And I worry a little bit that has slipped a little bit, and I don't blame the mainstream media. But I do think that social media and some of those other fora have made it really easy to live in an echo chamber, and that's affected democracies around the world. And I think we should be aware of that, and we should do what we can to try and improve it.
And don't worry, I'm going to ask them about the U.S. election, whether they want to answer or not. I mean, one of the guys up here was the ambassador. Well, let's talk a little bit about the hyperpartisanship, because I think one of the things that you often hear, particularly from former politicians and former journalists, is, oh, it was so much better when I was there, the House of Commons was so dignified, or at the provincial legislatures we got things done. Has it really changed that much? And how concerned are you about what almost all of you refer to in different ways, about hyperpartisanship or divisiveness in the country? Anyone want to go first, Frank?
Well, first of all, I think there are two elements to democracy. There's leadership, but there's also followership. And I'll speak about leaders in a moment, but followership might be more of an issue than leadership, because right now the public have access to tools that they didn't have access to even 10, 20 years ago. And from the anonymity of social media, they can really say anything. They can launch movements that look like they're thousands of people when they're a couple of dozen people. So as a leader, you're constantly being bombarded with all kinds of attacks from all kinds of angles, and very personal and vicious attacks. But a lot of that is from followership, so to speak. So I think that's different, and I think that it makes a material difference. In terms of leaders, I still think we produce leaders, interesting personalities. During my time, we had leaders who happened to get along very well, I thought. Christy may say the same thing. At the present time, a lot of the leaders seem to get along well, a lot of mutual respect. There are a couple who don't seem to. And,
do you want to name them or no?
and I think that tends to infect the entire mood a bit. But generally speaking, we've got a premier right here, Dennis King, who gets along with people of all persuasions and with the Prime Minister of whatever ilk it is. And that was the way I used to see politics being played out. It's not true universally at the present time, but that's more a function of personalities, I think, than of an institutional difference.
He just blew right past that question but again, he's a former politician, so I'm not going to be mean. So does that mean that compromise is not possible? either between political parties, between levels of government? Is it increasingly hard to reach compromise?
Yeah, I think it is right now with the current leaders. There doesn't seem to be much room for compromise. Then complicating it all is voters, the public, tend to have about a 10-year tolerance before they start to get a little bit jaded by the current leadership and want to switch to something. And I think that's causing a lot of consternation among voters who are not sure what that something will be.
I mean, compromise is always available to everybody. But you have to want it.
Yeah.
And that's why leadership matters, because the leaders who are in the country at any given time have to be prepared to sit down and say, you know what, let's talk. And in that, there's an implicit admission that you might not know everything yourself, and that you have to be able to admit that someone else might have an idea that's a good one. And the problem with the conversation, I think, that we're having in Canada, and we're certainly seeing this in British Columbia in our provincial election, is that there is absolutely no discussion and therefore no compromise. And there are a lot of voters, I think, who are sitting there going, I don't know who I want to vote, who I could even vote for here. And that's not, I mean, people need good choices.
Yeah.
They need to know that it's not black and white, that there's shades of gray in between them. And that's always what Canada's been. I don't think it is what we are now. And I would very much like to see our country get back to that.
I want to ask a couple questions about reconciliation, because I think you've all come at it from different perspectives. And I'll start with you, Joe Hanley. You talked about the Indian Act. You also talked about the federal government downloading a lot of jurisdictional responsibility to Indigenous communities. I wonder, what are the conditions that need to be in place in this country for the Indian Act to no longer be needed? And as you said, people have a love-hate relationship with it. But for us to get to a point where self-government is what is happening, and Indigenous peoples feel empowered to lead.
Yeah, I think we have that happening in Canada right now. Some of it in the Northwest Territories. We have three agreements that are comprehensive agreements that include all Indigenous people, and it's got the support of the non-Indigenous part of our population. And they seem to be working fairly well. There's one, and I think it's James Bay and Naskapi, who have had, again, a comprehensive agreement for quite a few years now. And the Indian Act really doesn't apply to anything that they're doing. We're going to see the same thing in the Northwest Territories, at least, where gradually the Indian Act itself will become less and less irrelevant. And I think it's happening, and I don't know exactly what's going on across the country, but I believe it's happening everywhere. So we can either take action to get rid of some things that are no longer that relevant and do it in an orderly way, or we can do it piecemeal, and it'll happen gradually. And I think another 20 years, another generation possibly, we'll just say, well, why do we have an Indian Act? What's it about? We have comprehensive agreements that do everything that was there before. And a fair financial arrangement is also pretty important. If you're going to devolve programs, you've got to put some dollars with them too to make them succeed. Otherwise, the people will say, well, see, we told you. They couldn't handle it.
Yeah. I wonder if Frank McKenna, you want to talk a little bit about the evolution of reconciliation from when you were Premier, because it does seem to me as though the bar is much higher. The Canadians now have an expectation of governments to work much harder on reconciliation than they did 10 years ago.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that the bar is much higher. You know, since then we've had numerous inquiries and we've had dialogue going on at different levels in different places. But I do want to say this. I believe there has been significant progress. When I first started, it was not commonplace that territorial leaders and Aboriginal leaders be part of First Ministers' gatherings. That very quickly evolved until that was a part of the established process. The number of treaties that have been negotiated is worth remarking. We may spend a lot of time arguing about those that haven't been, but we need to remark those that have. The territory that's been created, Nunavut, it's worth remarking. It's worth remarking the progress that Joe is talking about in the territories. So it is worth saying this. We shouldn't beat ourselves up over where we are as a country. Have we achieved success? No, we haven't. Do we have a long way to go? Yes, we do. And is it frustrating? Yes. But we need to look at the rest of the world and how they approach their Aboriginal or Indigenous communities. And by comparison, I think that we as Canadians should show some appreciation of the effort and the heart and the passion that we bring to the exercise. I guess, in other words, we shouldn't beat ourselves up. We should recognize that it's hard because it's hard, and that we are making an effort, we are striving, and we are moving forward.
Yeah, Joe? And then I'll go to Christine.
I think as well that a lot of people were hurt badly during the residential school experiences and also the 60s. And that's only one generation ago. And I think some of these things are going to take time before people have confidence that the system is not going to hurt them and that they can count on it to be supportive and be their government. So I don't see a lot of fast change in that. It'll come, but it'll take time.
Yeah.
Rosemary, I'm not going to talk about the Indian Act, not with Joe Hanley here. I certainly can't offer as much insight as he can to that. But in BC, we've got 203 First Nations, something like 43, 44 distinct languages, and all of the things that both Frank and Joe said are absolutely true, and I won't repeat that. But what I will say is we did 400 agreements with First Nations. In my government, we did, I think, 6 or 7 treaties with First Nations across the province. And our goal was this, and you talked about this, Joe, it's the money. Mm-hmm. And what we learned when we went to First Nations communities, and really remote, with these terrible outcomes, suicide, addiction, child apprehensions, incarceration, I mean, all of it was just terrible. The problem in those communities isn't government more than it is poverty. And I realize the way to resolve poverty, there's only one way, and that's to create wealth. And that means that when we go into Indigenous communities, what we do is we try and figure out how we can cut up the pie differently. So maybe government doesn't get as much of the money. Maybe the First Nation gets the money instead. And that creates an incredible cycle of, when revenue's created in the community by the community, people start bringing home paychecks, and kids start looking at their mums and dads differently when they've got the dignity of a paycheck in their hand. And when you're working to when you're working to demolish poverty in those communities, I mean, the Indian Act has been a big problem, but I would argue the fundamental problem in Canada for First Nations is that the system we've had has forced people to live in poverty on lands that were taken from them by colonial powers, and the land was their wealth. So we need to give Indigenous communities back some access to that wealth in the land, share it with them, and let them have a chance at solving poverty in their own communities, because they're going to do a hell of a lot better job than we have.
I just want to support what Christy said, and again, to note by way of the fact that there is progress. There is no chance now of developing a major project in Canada, no chance, without First Nations participation. It is now accepted as table stakes, that if you want to build a pipeline, or you want to open a mine, or you want to build a major project of any consequence across the country, First Nations have to be consulted, involved, and have an ownership stake in the process as well. And we're now taking that for granted. That's progress, the fact that we take it for granted that First Nations will be part of every decision.
Yeah, yeah. Because you're all premiers, former premiers, I want to talk a little bit about how you think the relationship between Ottawa and the provinces has evolved. Because it's true that it's always sticky and the fight is always top of the news if there's issues. But one of the things that this government has done, I would say they've done it effectively, whether or not you support it or not, but their strategy has been effective, to create national programs that they then convince provinces to buy into by giving them chunks of money. So obviously, daycare would be sort of the most recent example. They're going to start negotiating pharmacare deals, the dental care. These are all things that really are provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government, this federal government, has decided that it wants to set up these programs and has come to arrangements with provinces. So I guess my first question is that a good thing? Do you think that's a good thing? In spite of, put aside the programs themselves, but the way that they're trying to govern from Ottawa. And do you think that the relationship has changed in a dramatic way since you were premiers? Frank, yeah.
Well, I would say that it's a good thing that we're moving the ball down the field in terms of providing badly needed services for Canadians. In the national health care came about as a result of collaboration between the two governments, and we're seeing that what I would call a both social and economic program, childcare, coming about as a result of collaboration. You can't do it otherwise. Again, I'll repeat this phrase, it's far from perfect, but it's a federation. And it's inherently conflictual. Would that it were not, and it sometimes waxes and wanes depending on the personalities and the issues, but it's inherently conflictual. We went through that conflict on free trade. I recall how deeply divided the country was when free trade was first introduced. Now there's broad consensus that we have to have free trade with the United States, but not then. We would have national conferences every week with premiers and the Prime Minister trying to beat it out. I remember one that we had in Toronto where David Peterson tried to make his point in a very graphic way by bringing wine from the Niagara region to the table. Everybody was given a glass of wine, and he said, "This is what this issue is all about." He said, "This country will break up if we cannot protect these industries of ours," and this is an example of that. This Canadian wine will never be able to survive. And Robert Bourassa of Quebec, who was always more sophisticated than the rest of us, took a little sip of his wine and savored it, and then he said, "David, for this we would break up the country?" But my point is, that was conflictual.
Yes.
The GST was conflictual. Today, the grading is different, but it's even more pronounced. The carbon tax issue.
Yes.
The Government of Canada has a really strong goal and interest in climate change. That conflicts in terms of its implementation with some of the provincial imperatives. And building pipelines. There are different goals between the provinces and the federal government. And almost on every issue today, there is that grading and grinding between the two levels of government. I'm saying that it sometimes waxes, sometimes wanes, but it is a natural part of our country and the particular form of government that we've adopted, which is federalism.
Joe Hanley, you wanted to answer too?
Yeah, Indigenous leaders have have a tremendous concern about climate change and destruction of land and loss of ownership of land. And I don't think we've come to an agreement on how we're going to do that or what the limits are. It seems that if we find minerals, there are part of our country who want to exploit that as quickly as possible. Indigenous leaders by nature tend to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more thoughtful about what we're doing to not the land, but also the animals and the pollution and so on that goes with it. But coming back to the dollars, a lot of it is there because a lot of communities and leaders in communities that have comprehensive agreements, they've been slow to take up the program responsibility. Because as I said in my lecture, the 3 diamond mines we have in the north have collected $26 billion in royalties. Of that $26 billion, about $70 million per year goes to the territorial government. Then the territorial government gives 25% of that to the indigenous governments. So when you do the math and work it all down, communities are too often are saying, well, look, we're not going to take on health. We're not going to take on education. We're not going to take those on until there's some assurance of some money. Otherwise, we're taking a loser that federal government, you can keep it if that's what you're going to do.
I think Frank is right when he says it really does depend on the characters of the people that are around the table. Different prime ministers bring a different sense to it. And and provinces generally think, and, especially this is true in Quebec and probably some of the western provinces, hey, listen, don't tell us you want to do a big program because we know you're going to just pretend the money's there and then we're going to have to pay for it. But if the money is there, it's not a bad thing to have a national daycare program. Like, it's not a bad thing to have women in every province of the country be able to work rather than stay home. And, you can have a baby and work at the same time. Guess what, folks? That's awesome for Canada. And that's awesome for our economy.
It is.
We want that. And so I think there is a role for some national programs, and only the federal government can implement that. I think they need to make space for the provinces to do it differently, because we're all do our own thing, but sometimes it doesn't work, and when it doesn't work, you see that in flying colors. But let's just think about childcare. I mean, it was the Paul Martin government all those years ago that introduced the first national childcare program, and as a woman who had a baby while I was working, I can tell you, I'm very, very glad that this is finally coming to fruition in our country. Yeah, Jeff.
I think it rests with the government, but it also rests with Indigenous leaders. I won't let them off too easy. Sure. We have to do more with young people to get them through the education system, because no matter how we cut it, an education is essential. As part of one of my post-retirement jobs is as chair of the Board of Governors for Aurora College, tasked with developing a polytechnic university in the north. But when we look at who's coming to it, it's all middle-aged people with children and dependents and so on. We're not catching the young people anymore to the extent we should with the 17, 18, 19-year-old grade 12 graduates. Because they're busy, and a lot of the advances we made as a country are great. But when you go into a smaller community, you find many of the young people are not taking advantage of what it should be bringing. And I pin that onto the Aboriginal leaders, that they've got to start paying more attention to getting the young people through school. We run, in the Northwest Territory, we run community learning centers in 19 communities. We've got 21 students in those 19 centers. We can't keep them going because people are not sending their kids. The kids are staying up all night and then aren't ready to come to school. So I think we all have a role in there, and I'd really like to promote Indigenous leaders doing more than federal, provincial, territorial negotiations, but let's talk about those kids who are living in poverty.
You brought it up, and I wonder if you were trying to bring it up when you said sometimes it doesn't work. Do you think that the carbon tax doesn't work, that the government should walk away from it? I'm sure many of you got your carbon rebate in your bank account a day ago, 2 days ago, and we know that they've made exemptions for home heating oil for people in Atlantic Canada, and that sort of opened up a can of worms for the government in trying to maintain its position that a consumer carbon tax is important as the national government tries to fight climate change. Where do you all stand on the idea of a consumer carbon tax? Yeah?
Well, British Columbia, we were the first carbon tax in the country.
Yep.
And it was a very different design from the one that is happening in Canada now. And the fundamental difference was every penny from the carbon tax that came into government, every penny went back out in the form of tax cuts. And so those tax cuts were for individuals, but they were for corporate and small businesses as well. So what it meant was the cost of doing business in British Columbia went down, the opportunity for businesses to invest went up, the number of jobs it created was incredible, and we became the fastest growing economy in the country. And it was because of the carbon tax that we were able to do that.
But it was the way you did it.
But it was the way that we did it. And the argument that I have with carbon taxes in lots of places is that it is really hard to get people to support a carbon tax when they feel like the economy is slowing down, their standard of living is falling, and they can't find a job.
Yeah.
But so the key to a carbon tax is to make sure that you build it in such a way that it is part of growing your economy rather than shrinking it. Because when everybody's doing well, they're not so worried about all the taxes and how the taxes work. When their wallet is growing, when it's easier to get a job, when it's easier to get a promotion,
so
when your kids are working.
That's why they gave the rebate. So you don't think the rebate is convincing enough for people?
Well, I think that it's. First of all, I think 100% of it should go back into the economy, not 80%. And second, I think that they should be figuring out how to help grow the economy. And just having the money go into a consumer, kind of a consumer tax, I'm not sure that that's the right structure for it. So I'm a big supporter of carbon taxes because I think it has a demonstrable impact on cutting our carbon use. But the structure that you use to make it work has to be one where it allows the economy to grow rather than makes it shrink. And that's the key to gaining public support for it.
Obviously, I'm asking about it because it's a big hot topic in Ottawa because there's a Conservative leader who doesn't, axe the tax, all that stuff, and the other guy will want to keep it. So it's interesting to hear from former premiers, about whether it's the right approach. Joe?
I think the people in the North would say it's the right approach conceptually. We're okay with it. But when it comes to my own house heating or filling my truck with fuel, I don't like it, because if you live in Norman Wells today, it probably costs you about $800 to fill the fuel tank on your vehicle. Probably cost you a few $1,000s to fill up your house heating tank. So personally, they don't like it, gripe about it, but conceptually, they don't know of a better alternative, but it has to be marketed better.
How about you, Frank McKenna?
So, first of all, I totally support what Premier Clark has said on this. British Columbia introduced, in the words of the New York Times, the best designed environmental legislation in North America. And it worked.
He's just sucking up now.
Well, I've been watching it for years, and it was really good public policy. And Stéphane Dion stepped on a rake when he tried to do it, but British Columbia did it, and they did it well. Every economist would say that a carbon tax is good public policy. None of them have to run in elections, unfortunately, or else they wouldn't say some of the things they say. So it really comes down to program design. And there are two carbon taxes that we need to talk about. One, the industrial carbon tax federally. In my view, that should absolutely stay. It works. It's a price signal. It basically tells you that we don't want you to do that, and you'll be rewarded if you don't.
Right.
And I'm on the board of one of the big oil companies, and I can tell you that we change our approach because of the cost of that tax. It's good public policy. It also accounts for, I think, 70 or 80% of the carbon gains that have been made from carbon taxation. So it's good public policy. I hope it doesn't change. The consumer carbon tax has been a public relations disaster for the government. And it doesn't matter whether it's good public policy or not, it's probably good pure public policy. The communications has been horrific. There is nobody in the world who's associated the rebate with the tax. And because of that, you didn't get that pure change-off that British Columbia achieved.
Right.
And so people right now are going to buy into Poilievre and his argument, axe the tax. They don't realize they're also voting to axe the rebate. And people will be a little surprised at that. But that's what's happening. There's no doubt that we're going to lose this public policy because of its design flaws and communication flaws. But overall, we need to remember the prize. The prize at the end of the day is the environment. And we're a rich country, and we cannot afford to shirk our responsibilities, and that will cost us something, some element of sacrifice in order to do that. We just need political leaders who give us good program design and sell it to us in a way that we can buy.
Okay, the one question that I got asked, well, a few people saw me in the room, and the question that my parents ask me all the time too is, who's going to win the U.S. election? If I knew the answer to that, I'd be like more important than I actually am. But there, we don't know. It's very much a toss-up. There's 7 swing states where it's very, very close, and the consequences, I think, are real and worrying. So. And former Ambassador McKenna will start us off. What are you most, well, I mean, if you want to say who's going to win, feel free. But what are you most concerned about as we are now 3 weeks away, I guess?
Well, there's a lot to worry about. Let's not forget, just 4 years ago, we had an election that wasn't close. Biden won by almost 8 million votes. Popular vote. Now, people say the popular vote doesn't count. Well, if you lost by 8 million votes, I think you think the popular vote counted. So the Democrats won by 8 million votes and won the Electoral College as well. And yet that election was denied by President Trump, as he then was, and some 40 or 50 million Americans to this day believe they do not have an authentically elected president. In my view, of all the things that I disagree with about President Trump, the one that I have the most contempt for is undermining the authenticity of the President of the United States. So I mention that because my fear is that we're headed, you talked about things to fear, I fear that we're headed towards an election that may be even closer.
Yeah.
And I'll say 2 or 3 or 4 things. 1, we're going to get a change in the Senate. The Republicans will control the Senate. 2, I think the Democrats will flip the House. The first time those opposing flips have happened in the history of the United States. A president, I'd love to be able to call it, but it's just razor edge.
Yeah.
Tied, literally tied, so very difficult to call. If Biden, not Biden, Kamala Harris and her team win, it'll be the status quo, not perfect, lots of issues, but manageable. If Trump wins, and if he does what he says he will, it's going to be pandemonium, not only in Canada, but in the world. We're talking about a 10% tariff. There's a joke I should tell you. Robin Williams, the great comedian, once came to Canada and he said, "I feel sorry for you Canadians. It's just like a nice family living over a biker bar." And, and there is a bit of an element to that. But two things I'll say quickly. One, a 10% tariff would be devastating for a lot of Canadian industry. It would be more devastating for American consumers. Number one. Number two, if he crashes the taxes in the United States, it will make our industry very difficult to compete, and it will also create an enormous amount of inflation in the United States and a very high deficit. And thirdly, if he rounds up and deports millions of people, as he says he will, in the United States, we're going to have one of the ugliest situations we've ever seen on this planet. And a lot of those people may very well head to Canada, and we may end up being forced to deal with some extraordinarily difficult situations.
Yeah. Okay, I'm really sorry I asked. Anyone else want to weigh in on your concerns for Canada? Obviously, I mean, I think we all agree that if Kamala Harris wins, it's kind of, as Frank said, status quo. If we end up with President Trump, perhaps emboldened by a second term, there are all sorts of consequences from defense, trade, immigration, as you pointed out, that would directly impact us. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of statements being made now. One thing that I believe voters are getting tired of is being threatened, especially by some of the statements that Trump has made. And it's just not our Canadian way to support people who we feel are, we call them animals and so on. It's just not the way to do business. So I can't predict who will win, but I hope Kamala Harris wins it. Even if it's status quo, I think we're better off as Canadians in that rather than having that big elephant in the room right next door to us.
Yeah. Unpredictable.
Yeah.
And an unpredictable
I mean, and
leader,
I don't, both of these men, and in particular Frank, as a former ambassador, has said everything that needs to be said. I would only add that I don't think Kamala Harris is going to be great for us to deal with on free trade either, because she's got, she really depends on the unions in order to get elected. Good thing is Tim Walz is from a border state, and he really understands how important Canada is to the U.S. So I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk on free trade with the U.S. if she's the president. But, it bears repeating, if President Trump is reelected, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be a major problem for for lots of countries, but no one more than us. And it is a profound undermining of our democracies. I mean, when America abandons democracy because the president doesn't believe in it anymore, that's like an infection that goes all around the world. And that's what we can writ small worry about lots of the other things, and we should. But it's that big question, the big question I think that should draw our attention and our worry the most.
Yeah.
And that is so true, and I just want to follow up on the chaos thing and make a case for a different kind of a world. With Trump, it's not just, we're selfish, and we should be, about Canada, and the consequences are very serious. But it's also serious because of the world that we live in. And what he did in his last regime was undermine the WHO, the WTO on trade, the Paris Accords on the environment,
NATO.
Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Iranian Comprehensive Treaty, all the multilateral instruments that have been put together that I would call the guardrails in the world that try to help keep us moving in a civilized and peaceful way towards a common goal. All of those are being undermined. NATO, for example, we no longer trust that one country will defend the other. Do you think Ukraine is going to like a Donald Trump presidency when he thinks that he can call his friend Putin and get this thing solved in a day? And so on and so on. And what I'm trying to say is that my fervent hope would be not just Canada, but the entire world would recommit itself to multilateral institutions, because I think a rising tide really does lift all boats, and the world is a better place when we work together.
Yeah.
Okay. I know this was really supposed to be about Canada, but I thought you'd all get mad at me if I didn't ask those questions, given who's on stage. I'm going to come to the end of our panel, and I wish we had more time, because this is very entertaining and informative. But I'm going to end with a question that I ask, I think, all former politicians, probably, maybe not all. Maybe once you get into your 80s, I stop. But Frank McKenna, would you ever get back into politics?
No, I'm not going back. No, once you escape the trap, don't go back for the cheese.
Do you miss it? Do you miss it?
Honestly, and I mean this sincerely, it's like malaria. It gets into your bloodstream and it comes roaring out constantly. I miss it every day. I loved every second I was in public life. I might have been misleading myself, but every morning I woke up, I thought I was making my little part of the world a better place. And it was profoundly satisfying, and I've never had anything since that gave me the same sense of fulfillment. But I'm not stupid enough to go back.
All right, Joe Hanley, how about you?
Well, I've passed 80.
He looks good, though, doesn't he? I didn't know.
So I definitely, even if I was 62, I don't know that I would go back. I did enjoy my time there. I felt I was useful to our government and the people in the North. Would I do it again? Yeah, seriously, I probably would if I was 79, but not going to. I'm not going there.
But we want to hear Christy's answer on this.
Yeah.
There's only one person on the stage who I thought might have a different answer.
Well, I'll start by, I will say, and it bears repeating, because I think there are, people in this crowd and people who know people in this crowd who might think about going back and going into politics. And I'll tell you, it is absolutely true. There is nothing more fulfilling that you can do in your life. And I would say for women, I mean, it is harder for women because we, they used to, I remember watching the news one day and they're making fun of my haircut. And, so it's kind of, I don't know, do you ever get made fun of for your haircut, Frank? No. No, Joe? Probably not.
Not,
I have, though.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I would say, first I would say that. Second, I don't think I don't close the door on that because I think
So what are you going to do?
But it's one of those things. You don't want to be the only person that thinks you should do it. So, so I'm listening to Canadians, and I know people are concerned about lots of the direction of the country, and I think people want to make sure that they have some good choices. So it's not something that I would close the door on, but I do. If I never get back into politics, I want to find somebody great that we can support that's going to unite the country, because especially here today, all these people who've joined us, Rosemary, who are dedicated Canadians here in this 1,000-person, theater, it just shows such an incredible dedication and love for our country. And I see that every day, and I think our politicians need to reflect that better in this country.
So if a job opened up, like sooner rather than later, you would do what?
Well, I used to be a journalist too, Rosie, so you never know. Better watch out for your job. You know what, Rosie? I mean, I'll let you figure out what's going on in Ottawa. I certainly can't get a handle on it. There is no job available at the moment, but one of those things is that when you're a recovering politician, you sometimes keep an eye out for when an opportunity could arise.
That was a good answer. She knew that one was coming. There's no way she didn't know that one was coming. Thank you all. What a joy to spend some time with you and pick your brains and understand better why you did your jobs. One of the things that I know to be sure with all politicians that I have spent time with, and even the ones that I haven't, everyone believes in doing the best for the country. Whether you agree with what they're proposing, they are committed public servants dedicated to trying to improve your lives, and certainly that's what these three people and Dr. Couillard represent. So congratulations, and thank you for having me, and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie.
Thank you.